tuning in tonight. I'm back. Like I said, unexpectedly for you guys, maybe, but here I am, and ready to start another fabulous chapter. Um, I think it had a little bit of rocky start, but I'm kind of liking where it's going to right now. There's going to be having to be obviously some heavy editing because there were just some parts that are and I I sort of read some of the I sort of read some of the next chapter. I just didn't get a chance to get all the way through it. I'm pretty sure it's going to be less problematic than it was in the beginning. But I'm going to try and read around it again. So if you hear me suddenly stop, it's because I'm reading this cold. I know. I will learn. No, I won't learn. But I'm going to jump right into it, read it, try and read around it, try not to get kicked off of Twitch, and that'll be the key. So for those of you just tuning in, I'm basically reading my dad's manuscripts. This is, I believe, the fourth manuscript I've been reading. I'm just a little over halfway through. I'm on chapter 8. So 8 of 15. You can go back and watch many of them. Some of them have bad audio. I have to re-record those because I'm learning as I go. Even though I have like three manuscripts I was able to read through just fine until new problems have kicked in that I just found out about. But now I know how to fix those, so I'm not doing that anymore. But without further ado, you can kind of watch some of them. I'll let you know once new ones are up for that I've re-recorded. That's not going to happen this weekend. But next weekend I'll probably try and do the pickup spots for that as I can. Anyway, without further ado, this is chapter 8 of Plague Wizards. The Grand Master was entirely too young for that title. By now, Melunctal had come to connect Hygelane's desire to attack Frostland with other facts. The previous Grand Master of Pangua House had attempted a powerful spell, one that ran wild on him somehow, and killed all the other higher magicians in his household, as well as in all the wizardly households within a wide area of the city. Those it didn't kill, it incapacitated. Because most of the powerful wizards were within one section of the city, and that within a certain radius, the only magicians of any power left in the city were ones who had not belonged to any household, either because they hadn't been taken on, or worse, because they had been cast out. Further, this left Gagapeng vulnerable to the attack that Melunctal, had been working at. Furthermore, Hygelane, seeing an opportunity, decided that the attack should be launched now, with no waiting. Melunctal's own feeling was that the late Grandmaster had been a colossal fool for not having used appropriate shields. The present Grandmaster surveyed his guest. They were in a comfortable wood-paneled inner room, one in which the present Grandmaster seemed to be a tentative occupant. "So you're the wonder from Seljashin." "I wouldn't call myself a wonder, save in comparison to the wizards who are left in Gagapeng. But I'm sure I can be a benefit to you. I'm interested in how someone like you came to be produced by Seljashin. I was chosen at an early age and trained rigorously. The training was always concerned with making sure that I should not become a second Blue Blossom wizard. I'm sure you know something of our history. I was set to work on a project which had its aim at the destruction of Rossan, as the nation was most likely to give rise to another Blue Blossom wizard. From the time my predecessor was declared suspect and executed, I've been the head of that project, and just recently I was removed myself, though not yet declared suspect. The young Grandmaster's eyebrows rose questioningly. And after so many years of working toward our destruction, you come to us for refuge? Melungtil had long ago given up the notion of saying his true reason for defection. You may think you know what it's like being a magician in Saljashan, but let me explain. Anyone who shows any potential for magic is constantly watched. Some few are taken on and officially trained. Part of the training is being forced to watch, almost weekly, as one of one's fellow students is ripped apart by magic because he's been declared suspect. Suspect, of course, means any sort of behavior the authorities don't like. You eventually come to realize that the chosen suspect was declared so, not so much for what he or she might have done or said, but to be an example for the survivors. Even becoming head of an important project, such as I was, is no real safety. It merely means that the Watchers will see you as a greater danger of turning yourself into a Blue Blossom wizard. I was removed from the project because I thought it was still too far dangerous for Saljashan itself to be used safely. The next thing that would have happened is that the Watchers would have declared me suspect, so I fled. It seemed to me, with my knowledge of this project, Rosthan would most likely protect me, so I came here. I see. What is the nature of this dreadful project, then? Simply put, it consists of several plagues turned loose against you all at once, as well as several forms of blight and fungus to attack trees and crops. Again, the eyebrows rose. How do these plagues and blights distinguish between Rosthanite and Saljashanite, or between Rosthanite and Saljashanite crops? A good part of the development consisted of spells to prevent these plagues and blights from flourishing within a particular territory. Part of my objection to their use was that not enough work had gone into stabilizing the diseases. I felt there was altogether too much chance of wild forms coming back on us, not just destroying Rosthan, but all nations. There was more than a touch of anger in the Grandmaster's voice now. So, you've come here to give us what? A 2 days warning of what's coming? How generous! Melungtil shook his head. The truth is, I can't say how much warning you might have. I can tell you, though, how to do the counterspells and how to give you most of the details of the plans as it stands. All this should allow you to catch up without going through years of development. Melungtil realized that the interview had long ago gotten away from any control he might have had over its course. His only hope was that this too young Grandmaster would allow his good sense to outweigh his anger. Fine, the Grandmaster said, and you bring us all this at a time when Pangua House is short-trained of wizards? When Pangua House is short of trained wizards, and will have serious difficulty trying to counter your project on a necessary scale? Sanat's toenails! Will not the other wizardly households take share in something such as this, which affects them all? You don't know the households, do you? The Grandmaster considered the matter. Well, I think I'd best try to take this to the king. He can, if he will, give orders to the household. How quickly the households will be to jump to obey such orders is another matter altogether. Hajalini watched the wizards. The first thing they had done, some days ago, was to kill several Desha, then stand, holding hands, upon a map of Saljashan. As he understood it, the spell must be repeated every day for 3 days in order to be sure of covering the whole country. Today they had set up a massive iron bowl of gray-green powder, which was held in place by a simple spell. They had killed 2 more Desha, then stood, chanting around the bowl. Rise up! Rise up! Move as the river moves. Move as the wind moves. Move to Gagapang. Rise up! Move! Descend upon the town of wizards. Rise up! Move! Descend and do your work! And they continued to chant, a chant that would go on for hours. The powder rose straight up in a long green-gray streamer into the sky. As the wizards had explained to Hajalini, somewhere up there the streamer would bend and move toward Gagapang. The original intent, many years back, had been to cover all Rosthan, but the massive amount of all of that powder required for such a surface area would be an extreme danger to Lynch-McCor itself. They had settled for massive plagues in Gagapang, which by nature would spread to most of the rest of the nation in the end. In any case, Rosthan would be destroyed as a nation. Saljashan would still have to be vigilant, since Rosthan would likely produce more wizards. On the other hand, knowing that this disaster had been produced by wizardry, the people of Rosthan might well decide on their own to stamp out wizards. He brought his mind back to the present. First, wait to see how well this project succeeded. They had told him that the very soonest any effect might be seen would be a week and a half from now, and they had also assured him that that would be the most fortunate circumstances. It would be best to keep these present magicians working on the project, continuing to refine it, and producing better antidotes. Melunctil and his successor had expressed fears about the project. If those fears came to pass, and some form of disease, or any of the diseases, came about, that was not amenable to the controls the Saljashanite wizards already had, swift action was going to be necessary. He set his mouth in a firm line. They would have to be watched too. The seduction of magic was insidious. He spent a moment thinking about Melunctil. Could he have gotten to Gagapang? It was a long and dangerous way. Even if he had, though, how quickly would he have been able to find anyone to listen to his story? Everyone knew about the attitude towards wizards in Saljashan. If some wizard, albeit a wizard of compatibility, appeared in streets announcing that Saljashan was preparing doom and destruction for Rosthan, who in officialdom would listen to him? How exact was Melunctil's memory of the work done on the project? That, unfortunately, could not be minimized. As head of the project, he knew enough of it, and enough of the details, that it was likely someone could reproduce it from what he had in his memory. The only salvation was that, given the restriction on use of writing materials on the project, he would not have been able to copy down any significant amount to take with him. Hadjalani shook his head slightly. There were too many variables. All he could say for certain was that Rosthan would be very late in making any attempts at production. Furthermore, they were very short of high-quality wizards there, and if this latest item were true, all the wizardly houses in Gagapang were at odds with each other too. If they didn't pull themselves together more swiftly than it seemed likely they would be able to, the project would succeed, at least to the point of rendering Rosthan a negligible threat. Captain Yanoma had not reported back, which meant he had most likely failed to catch Melunctil. The captain had also probably worked out just what his failure meant. Demotion at the very least, most likely listing as a suspect. Hadjalani spared a moment to think of the Saljashanite agents in Rosthan. Unfortunately, it was not possible to protect them from the attack on Rosthan. What good would it do anyway, when Rosthan was shortly going to become a desert where little or no food grew? It would never be possible to send them messages warning them to leave. One such message, getting into the wrong hands, would undo all the good Hadjalani's careful planning had done. It was even possible that such news would drive the Rosthanite wizards to unite, permitting them that one last faint possibility of pulling themselves out of disaster. No, it was unfortunate for the Saljashanites presently in Rosthan, but Saljashan must be protected from the return of the Blue Blossom Wizard, in whatever form he might come. Allison hadn't seen Royan for 2 days. There was a rumor among the servants that someone had come to Pengwa House from Saljashan, near as she could make out, a nation to the east, with some kind of seriously bad news. Sultang, Meloptis's child, a slender young man, just out of his teens, what was known in the household as a baby wizard, came into the canteen and approached Allison's table when she waved him over. "Have you seen Royan in the last few days?" Solitang shook his head, grinning. "Big troubles, I hear. I understand he's been trying to get a message through to the royal house, and the king is acting like we're not here. Our Grandmaster wants the king to order the cooperation of all the wizardly households in the city. They're saying that the Saljashanites have come up with some kind of spell to destroy all of Rosthan." She nodded. I've heard of that one too. Though I yell and bid, I still don't know enough for it to have meant a lot to me. You think there's something to it? There's always something to servant gossip and town gossip, though sometimes not the real truth. You have any more words you can't figure out in that thing? He pointed to the big book she'd been carrying, still intent on making sure there wasn't something in it someone didn't want her to know. She gave him a look. Speaking of things that sometimes don't have a lot of truth in them, not just yet. Thanks anyway. The next day, Royan appeared in the canteen, looking worn and discouraged. Well, Tangrel really did it to us. Has anyone told you about Saljashan? A little bit. A state to the east of us, highly antipathetic to magic and wizards? He nodded. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's the important part. They had a wizard turn up, very good with hypnotic drugs, called himself the Blue Blossom Wizard. Used political skills as much as anything else, if you ask me. He ran the nation for some time, until an uprising of some sort got rid of him. The whole thing left them with a hate for magic and wizards. Since we and Rostan use magic for so many things, even common everyday things, they worry about another Blue Blossom Wizard showing up among us. He shrugged and continued. Apparently, despite their distaste for magic, they've been working on for years an effort to destroy us. The man most recently in charge of that effort has made his way here to warn us. Not so much that he decided he loves Rostan, apparently, as that he's afraid they haven't got it fully developed and it may turn around and destroy Saljashan too, possibly even the rest of the world. He ground the heels of his palms into his eyes. I've been wearing myself out to get the palace to take notice of it. I can't get anyone over there to pay attention. It seems that the general feeling is that this is something Pango household has drummed up to improve its battered reputation. It also seems that nobody's told the king yet. I've talked to messengers and ministers, and they've promised me that my message will be taken to the king in due time. He snorted. Due time sometimes means 3 weeks, maybe more. According to Malungtol, we have as little as 3 days. Malungtol? The fellow from Saljashan. They decided to rush their attack because they heard about the disaster Tangrel caused. They expected they'd be best to attack while we had few strong wizards to deal with the thing. That rush was part of what drove Malungtol to desert. How much can Pango House do by itself? That's one of the problems. We can only do so much. We have no hope of protecting all of Rostan, not even all Gagpahang. If we protect only Pango House, and when this thing hits, sure as smoke flies upward, everyone will blame us. What sort of thing is this? He shrugged. It's apparently a pair of attacks in one. One part of it is a set of plagues to attack the people. The other is a set of blights to attack the most of the food crops. But they're keeping those from coming back and attacking their own territory. How? They've developed a set of spells to protect them. Just before they set loose the active part, they'll be covering their own territory with the protective spells, which won't let the plagues or blights have a chance to start. And you can reproduce these protective spells? That's where the problem lies. Yes, we can, and we are reproducing the spell based on what Malungtol's told us. But we don't have enough wizards capable of handling enough power to take care of the whole country. Even with the help of all the other households, it'd be tricky. The other households won't agree to anything we suggest, though. Our only hope is to get the king to issue a decree to all the wizards, and for all that we have to get a message through to the king immediately, something that seems unlikely to happen. He shrugged. We've been working hard, covering Pango House, and we have it fairly safe. When people start dying, though, word of our attempting to warn the king is going to get around the city, and Pango House is going to find itself in the center of a massive riot. She nodded. It wouldn't be the first time in anyone's history that such a decision was taken by a half-knowledgeable population. Pango House and the person of the late Great Master had caused the original trouble. The panic surrounding the plague of the outbreak of the plague would do the rest. Do you plan to evacuate the city? His eyebrows went up. Have you been listening at the doors where you shouldn't be? He grinned. No, don't bother getting angry. I suppose anyone with any sense would be thinking that way lately. Yes, we've been slipping people off for a long time. Some of the older servants, with a few younger ones to take care of them. We've been sending them off to the farming colony along at Nalagang Bay. Trouble is, a mass emptying of Pengwa House would likely start the riots ahead of time, and we quite possibly wouldn't survive to get to the gates of the city. What about your balloon? He smiled tiredly. I'm a bit ahead of you there. I've had a couple of advanced students making flights, taking copies of all the basic books out to the farming colony. The balloon can only carry so much, though. We're building a bigger one, though, but we're still concentrating on the old-fashioned wagons. We should be able to get most of our people out. Royan looked around the council table. Everyone was looking as weary as he felt. Well, does anyone have any good news? We've recruited a lot of wizards, Farrell said. A few of them could be sitting here instead of us. Ryan's mouth went into a stiff line. That's going to be more trouble down the line. Some of them already know something about how households work, and in a little while, a few months, perhaps years, they're going to think they know enough about the history and customs of Pengwa to be able to run things, and run things better than we do. About that time, when we have to deal with a lot of unrest. There's no procedure allowed for to vote us out of office, Ormond said. The Grand Mastership goes to the highest class living master. I don't think there's even a procedure for abdication. If you look through the records, Ryan said, assassination has happened a time or two. Mostly it's been covered up by reference to severe illness, but it's happened. You sound calm about it. Ryan shrugged. I think I have 2 to 5 years before that finally really becomes a problem. Anyway, we have to make a decision on whether or not we're going to protect the palace, even if they won't grant us permission. Ormond shook his head. We've talked about that. We'd have to lower the protective spells we have on the palace first, and that'd cause the alarms to go off all over the place. Can you imagine the excitement over in the royal house if they thought we were attacking them? I don't think it would help much if we told them, don't worry, it's just us, your loyal wizards of Pengwa House, putting some protective spells around you. Royan looked at Farrell. I agree with you on this one, Royan, but just barely. Protecting them, even though they haven't allowed us to consult with them on the matter, is barely better than letting them go hang because they won't allow us to consult. They'll be upset about the lack of consultation, but they'll be even more upset when the real attack comes and they start dying. Maybe this way we can keep them inactively hostile to us rather than actively attacking us. I still say we're being too nice to people who aren't going to be grateful, Ormond declared. All right, we'll start the protective spells on the palace immediately. And Rostan is finished? I'm afraid so, Farrell. Pengwa House has been put in a position where no one will take our warning seriously. Worse still, when the plagues and blights hit, everyone's going to blame us. He paused. I've given orders for the production and testing of several larger balloons. We'll be able to use the speed and communication to keep Pengwa House alive. Though I think it's going to be vastly different from the Pengwa House as we presently know it. Ormond frowned. What are we without the city, without the king? Just another band of wandering wizards looking for a home. But we'll be alive. We could put barriers around the household grounds, but how long could we hold them in place? Particularly if the blight makes it near impossible to live in this area? And the king, like as not, will send his army to demand answers of us. Best we move somewhere else. Ormond drew in a deep breath. And we can't protect the whole city with our limited resources, so I suppose investing some of them in something that may have a positive outcome, keeping the king from being actively hostile, might be the best idea. Roya nodded. Well, thank you. We'll start on it this evening. There was a rap on the door, and a servant stuck his head in. Royan, sir, the Grand Master of Falander household has come to speak with you. Royan looked at the others. Falandar? What could that be about? They're actually one of the smaller houses. We can't afford to turn down even the least bit of help. If you two will wait here, I'll talk to him and report back as soon as I'm done. Bibakalat, Ling Bagat's child, Grandmaster of Philander House, was slightly corpulent. Really? Corpulent. And seeing abilities in the more expensive clothing that had suddenly became his suddenly acquired situation. He was clearly trying to keep worry off his face and out of his voice, but with only moderate success. He spoke right up with what was on his mind. Pangua, they're saying you've had word of what's coming. They're saying you've had word of a coming attack from Seljashan. That's true. We've been trying to convince everyone to help us, but no one trusts Pangua anymore. The Grandmaster of Philander did not say, by word or facial expression, we have reason, but the words seemed to spring, unsaid, into the slight silence. Suppose we do. That is, suppose Philander House puts some trust in your warning. Is there anything that can be done? I believe so. I doubt it will be possible to save all of Rostam, not even all of Gekapang, but we can save something. The same man who brought us the warning from Seljashan also brought us most of what we need to know to prevent it. The difficulty is that we, that is, Pangua House, do not have sufficient wizards of sufficiently high caliber to do all the work needed. So will you charge us for this knowledge? Royan hesitated only a moment, then said, We offer it to you for nothing, or at least for future considerations to be negotiated at that time. Kalat looked suspicious. For nothing? Can we expect it to be worth more than what we paid for? You know how they think of Pangua House in the city these days. To have even one household willing to do business with us is no small advantage. We don't want it trumpeted about that we're on your side. Royan shook his head. It wouldn't be to our advantage to merely have another household hated and distrusted as we are. It would be more of an advantage for us for you to quietly give us aid and assistance when you can. The Grandmaster of Philander hesitated and then said, We aren't rich. No, we are comparatively, but it does us no good if no one will sell to us. I see. So I assume you've thought of the situation in the city when the plague hits. Yes, we've been thinking about that quite a lot. Pipakalat gave Royan a look. Yes, I'm sure you have. And you have some plans for escape, I assume? Yes, we have some plans. We'll pass on some suggestions to you if you wish. For a fee, I suppose. For nothing you can't afford. It's not in our interest to stand by and see all of Rostan, even all Gekapang, destroyed, you know. So you keep saying. We've got Philander House on our side, Ormant said. Is that supposed to be an advantage? It's better than it was, Ormant. You know the troubles we've had with our servants being recognized and occasionally stoned in the streets, with no one willing to sell to us, save at inflated prices. Sometimes not even then. We'll need to buy a lot of things, very noticeable things, for our evacuation of the city. At least Philander House can do some quiet purchasing on our part. And you've given them everything for no cost at all? Royan frowned at him. I'm sure you heard what I just said, Ormant. That little benefit, the ability to make purchases without the matter coming to the wrong ears, is worth a whole lot of gold. And I did leave the price open to negotiation, so that we may make a bit of gold too. On the whole, I think we'll come out ahead in the bargain. Longtail chewed on the end of his pen. He had some time ago reached the end of the portions of the project he knew by heart. He was thinking, not for the first time, how nice it would have been to have brought a little notebook of jottings and reminders with him. He snorted. Notebooks. The way writing materials were controlled on the project, you know very well you were lucky to have brought yourself away, let alone anything written. Even so, it wasn't really the diseases and blights as produced by the project that were the trouble. It was that those weren't sufficiently stable yet, which could lead to natural changes occurring with all the consequences that entailed. No matter how good the wizards of Pangua House were, They were at a disadvantage without as full a knowledge of the process of the project as possible from the very beginning. Anything he could give them was an advantage, of course, but he had come to the project late, and even he had to consult the records frequently, just to be sure of what had been done before. So now he was scribbling away here, bringing little bits and pieces out of his memory, hoping he could make something coherent out of them. He knew that his reputation in Pangua House was not the best. He had been one of the people to have produced this horror, and the fact that he brought warning to Gagapang was not complete amelioration. Indeed, when he came to think about it, he found it hard to forgive himself. That long time ago as a student, when not doing your best could lead to being condemned as a suspect, the more recent time when not putting all your efforts toward the destruction of Rostan could lead to the same consequences, all seemed far away. Was there nothing he might have done to prevent all this? No suspect ought to make public declaration of their beliefs. Few of your colleagues would listen to you for fear the watchers might see them as suspects themselves. Furthermore, most people in Seljashan were convinced that Rostan was just what they'd always been told it was. The great danger of the return of the Blue Blossom Wizard in some guise. Should he have decided to try to slip out and be a slider? How had Slider reached his present status? How had he managed to learn enough to survive, to continually slide out of the grasp of the Watchers? How would Slider himself survive when the plagues changed and altered and attacked Seljashan? He sighed and wrote another phrase, stared at it, read it, and sat for a moment with his eyes closed, hoping to recall a bit more. A few words on either side of that phrase. The thing was, he hadn't become another Slider. He hadn't gone the least bit against the Seljashan authorities until he himself was facing the state of a suspect. Had she seemed to have tried to give him a little leeway, not calling him suspect immediately, perhaps even hoping them along till it would ask to be reinstated. An indication of the Chief Watcher's respect, he supposed. That respect would have lasted for only another day or two at most, though. Should he have gone to some other nation? He could have, he supposed, but Rostan had been the nation most likely to take action, and most likely to be the kind of people who would take action. That meant that Rostan was the place to go, despite the disaster that had struck down so many of her wizards. Yes, Rostan was the place to come, even if his welcome were not as open as he would have wished. He set down his pen and stood. His new master would strongly prefer to have him stay here. Bent over his pen, nor could he fault him for that attitude, considering the horror that might already be flying through the night sky. On the other hand, he had already done the important part, written out the antidote spells to the plagues and the blights, written out all he clearly remembered on the notes of the project to the best of his ability. He didn't fool himself that everything was faultless, save for the antidote spells, which he had had the occasion to study and even write out several times while he worked on the project. A capable wizard going through his notes on the project would probably spot many of the flaws that he was too close to the matter to see, and at least they would be better off than they would have been with just a bare warning that the attack was coming. He felt he required some exercise, avoiding thinking too much about whether or not he deserved it. He'd been introduced, briefly, to the household canteen, almost as if he weren't worthy of visiting it, but he understood that food and drinks, beer, wine, or fruit punch were available on his signature, and that was a place of free discussion. Coming from the Watcher-dominated society of Seljashan, such freedom seemed unlikely. The wall decorations of the canteen, however, consisted of impossible fruits and vegetables, plants which might be forced into being, but would not likely be able to bear seeds. Other decorations showed very carefully drawn pictures of impossible constructions, scenes an artist could only render by using tricks of perspective or perception. Not at all the kind of thing that would be on display anywhere in Seljashan. In fact, certain drawings of this sort were occasionally passed around surreptitiously among the trainee wizards in Saljashan, with the threat of being declared suspect always in the background. Further, his impression was that it would be the sort of thing that the Grand Master of Pengwa household had not yet grown out of. Though to give him credit, he seemed to be pressing himself to grow up to the stature required of him. Several young people were nattering back and forth, including one young well-dressed woman who held a place marked in a book. Part of Melanchthon's training had included at least a degree of Rossonite work, though too much interest in Rossonite writing could be suspect. The book this woman held would have been suspect in Saljashan, if only for its obtrusiveness, which hinted at a search for hidden knowledge. He wasn't sure just how much hidden knowledge the young woman sought, but it seemed she didn't exactly trust the explanations the young man were giving her. At least the one young man was speaking. He listened a moment to the youngsters trying to explain it, the youngsters who ought not to be studying that book or its like. What had been wrought in Rosthan? Were they so pressed for wizards they were thrusting young men and women into this sort of thing? Actually, it was a bit beyond him too, and he considered him for a moment saying so. One of the young fellows looked at him. "You there, what do you think this means?" he demanded. Melanchthon shook his head. "I don't know that one." "You don't know that one? Where are you from? It's the standard works of magic." The young man paused. While Melanchthon was considering the ways of avoiding getting into things, the fellow went on. "You're that Saljashanite, aren't you? The one who came bring prophecies of doom and destruction?" Melanchthon shook his head. "Not something I want to get into." "Huh. I suppose not. Everybody knows how badly you people hate magicians. So what have you been up to over there? Plotting and planning how to destroy Rosthan?" Melanchthon shook his head again, noticing that the third man had slipped quietly out of the canteen, clearly seeing trouble coming. Trouble that he, the great wizard from Saljashan, had been totally blind to. How fast had the story of his presence traveled, not to mention several versions of the reason for his coming. It was beginning to seem less and less like this was like a good idea to have left his study. The young woman saved him. She slapped the book down on the table hard enough to get the attention of both, then said, "If you're trying to show off to impress me, Laniswal, you're doing it the wrong way. Bullying a foreigner who's already nervous about being in a strange country just strikes me as juvenile. Stop pushing and relax." Laniswal brought up his head sharply and looked at the young woman. For a moment it was as if he was going to say something, but only snorted, "Huh," and strode away. Melanchthon looked at the young woman, saw her smiling at him, a smile carrying little mirth. "That's me, Alison McHarg, useless woman or causer of cataclysms, however you look at it. I'm the one the late great Master of Pengwa brought over. Wanted me so desperately he broke all the rules, and because of that destroyed the chief wizards of Gagapeng, which means most of the best wizards in Rosthan. And nobody knows what to do with me." "You aren't a wizard?" She laughed. "As magical as this tabletop here. Probably less so, because likely some magic went into making the table. But you're studying that book." She gestured with the book. "This? When he brought me over, the late great master managed to give me the ability to speak the language, more or less. But I can't read a word of it. Couldn't, I should say, because I'm learning it, though not as fast as I'd like. They encourage me to read as much as I want, in the hopes they can figure out why I'm here. The only reason they've come up with so far is just the Grand Master Tangrel looked that much worse. And because I'm a suspicious sort, I insist on reading a few they say were too abstruse for me." She gave him another look. "In case you hadn't guessed, I don't necessarily trust everything they tell me." He smiled. "Not much use in my agreeing with them, then? I find that book too abstruse." She gave him a sharp look, then relaxed slightly. "I suppose it'd be too much of a complicated scheme to just happen to have the wizard from far off Saljashin meet with me and assure me that this book won't tell me anything anyone doesn't want me to know? Truth is, I might as well be trying to read one of the books of the ancient languages for all I'm getting out of this. Maybe I should have you go through the library with me to find some works that might be useful? She shook her head. Sorry, forget it. From what I hear, you're far from useless here. This brought back to Melunctil the memory of his guilt at the desertion of his duty. He shrugged. Walk a mile into flames, why not two? Suppose I come along and give you a few suggestions, then get back to work. This time her smile was real. If word gets around, young Lonswell is going to be red and green and steaming at the ears. Let's go. Royan surveyed his gathering of wizards. Most of them were men who'd recently been taken on, yet not formally adopted, but well on the way. The single of whom there was no question of the fitness was the South Jashanite, Melunctil. The ability was only part of the fitness, though. The man could well have taken on the Grandmaster's role, if merely ability were all that mattered. One thing still bothered Royan. Melunctil had spent all those years working to develop the set of processes and spells that would destroy Rosthan. Then suddenly he ups and runs off to warn Rosthan? Not so much for the love of Rosthan, it seems, as for his concern of that the attack could run wild and destroy Rosthan, Saljashin, and just about everything else. Royan had a suspicion that if he had all the knots out of the thing when an old Tangrel had done his disaster, Melunctil would have been just as happy to let fly. Well, he'd spent too much time getting down to already spent too much time getting down to business. All right, masters, you've had time to study the matter at hand. We're about to put a protective spell on the royal house. We've worked out all the parts and requirements, including sufficient shielding for the work. We want to go to work immediately, with no stops or hesitations. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry. I have bad allergies right now. I do apologize. We'll want to go to work immediately, with no stops or hesitations. Does anyone have any questions? There was silence. Then one of the fellows, Calagangas from Palang, spoke up. Everyone knows how the king feels about us, Grandmaster. When we raise the shield to put this spell on them, won't they just be more suspicious, perhaps even hostile? Royan frowned at the man. He'd either been denied a family name or had lost it, thus having to call himself from Palang. That wasn't necessarily a reason to dislike or distrust him, but when he came up with a question like that at this time, when I say that we've made a decision, I mean that the Grand Masters have made a decision, no matter how thin the board of Grand Masters might be. That would be himself thinking that. I suppose the question is, Kangalas, do you accept the decisions of the Masters of Kango household? Kangala's eyes slid away from Royan's gaze. No argument, Grandmaster. His voice trailed off. You just asked a difficult question at the wrong time, Kangalas. Did someone put you up to this, or are you just being naturally awkward? All right, are there any further questions then? No? So let's begin. The wizards moved to their positions. Royan considered that it might have been a good thing for Kangalas to ask his question. It forced Royan to bring out the hammer of the master's decision. Any other question regarding the reasons for doing what they were doing would risk going against the master's decision. And unless there was some conspiracy going on that was more serious than Royan thought possible, no one's going to ask anything more. Allison noticed that Royan was looking more than usually tired this morning as he came up to her table at the canteen. Don't want to push myself on you, Allison, but we've just done something that's likely to have important consequences. I'd assume you didn't have to find out from all the rumors that'll be going around. Sit down. she said, and tell me about it. In her mind, she was wondering if they might have decided to do something with her or about her. It doesn't really have anything to do with you personally, save that it concerns every member of the household. It almost seemed that he'd been reading her mind, but she was concerned about her future, and he knew that very well. Just last night we took steps to protect the royal house against the attack from Seljashin. That required raising the magical shields we had over the royal household. Something they'll notice over there. Given our present relationship to the royal house, we can expect them to react with suspicion, at the very least. You'll hear all sorts of rumors, such as that we're attacking the king, that we're trying to take over kingship of Rostan, and so on. The truth is, we're just doing our duty to protect the royal house, though given our lack of credit, the king might well choose not to believe that. As he spoke, he absently began to finger the little book she'd been reading. Then he looked down at it, then up at her. Are you finding this a little easier to comprehend? She felt herself flushing. Yes, a bit. Malunkel pointed it out to me. She saw his eyebrows rise a bit. He did he? Good for him, then. I always thought you were trying to push yourself a little too far too fast. But I insisted on suspecting everyone of hiding something from me. For all her care at watching what she said, the admission seemed to jump out of her mouth. She felt herself flushing even more. She forced herself to look up at him. I guess the boy's been too suspicious, haven't I? Considering the situation you're in, yanked away from something familiar and with no chance to agree or disagree for a reason that seems to have no more than a vague notion of, only assurances that no one means you harm, I'd say suspicion was a reasonable frame of mind. Then add to that this business that happened in Strixburg, where you defended yourself and still found yourself on the wrong end of things. Well, he let his voice trail off. She forced herself to smile. Be careful. Any time now, you're going to push me to my other reaction, to be mad at you for being so damned understanding. Before he could respond to that, she hurried on to a less dangerous topic. This book, right here, at the end, is what seems to be a spell for making things seem larger? Ah, yes, the magnification spell. I know about it mostly from history. A fellow was about to start a woodworking shop and wanted a spell to enable his craftsman to assess the grain of a piece of wood easier. So someone produced the spell for him. Trouble was, his craftsmen had all been trained in the old-fashioned way, doing things by eye, and had little use for this newfangled thing. So the enterprise went on, though I believe it would have folded later on due to some unwise business decisions. The spell is kept around as an example of something that the wizard in question ought to have talked the customer out of bothering with. No one's ever found a use for it. I see. Give me a minute, because that doesn't seem right. That really doesn't seem right. According to this, that's the end of the chapter, but I beg to differ. So just give me a minute here. I'm gonna vamp for a moment while I figure out. Could be the last of the chapter, but I don't believe it for a minute. I now just need to wait for my computer to do its thing. Bear with me. Like I said, I'm vamping. Vamp, vamp, vamp. Vamp, 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 vamp. Vamp, 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 vamp. Almost there. Just waiting for one more thing to load. You don't want to know how many things I have running on my computer right now. It's a little embarrassing. Let's just say too many things. I thank you for your patience tonight. Wait, that is the end of it. Okay. That's the end of the chapter, everyone. I don't know why it's the end of the chapter, but I guess it's the end of the chapter. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Yeah, okay, well, let's just hope that maybe chapter 9 will pick up and we'll have a better idea of what happens. At any rate, thank you for tuning in tonight. Take care, and I will see you then. Thank you. Good night.